when you're talking about how great you are, in your product and service, and the difficult problem that you're solving and all that kind of stuff, and you're saying how, basically exposing the value basically of what you're selling, and yet your price point does not match what you sell, then your audience on the other side is going to be very skeptical, right? I mean, think about it. As a consumer, we're going to be skeptical. It's too good to be true, basically. But what happens when the price starts to match a little bit what the perceived value of what you're communicating, and then what you're hoping that the consumers, what's in the consumer's head? Like I said, don't do competitive analysis. Don't price yourself based on the competitors. But, consumers, they kind of know, especially those that either already purchased a product like yours, they already kind of know the landscape a little bit. They kind of know where the price points tend to be.
Well, and I think too, it's sad when we undercharge what we're worth. I think a lot of it can do with your own self-image, because how many times has something gone out of business and you really like that product or service and we would have been willing to pay more? I'm like, oh my gosh, I love that. It's like, I always thought it was a little, on the low end of price, but I would have been willing to pay more just for it to stay around.
So think about the psychology of price setting. What is your price saying to your customer, right? And so whenever we've seen a price increase up to 15%, I don't know if we've ever seen our clients lose customers. Thriving in Tandem. It's a podcast for you, the married entrepreneur that wants to win in business and marriage at the same time.
Welcome to Thriving in Tandem.
Welcome back to Thriving in Tandem.
Hi, Tandem family.
And today we're going to get down to some serious business.
Serious?
Serious. We're going to really tackle the topic of profitability. We're going to talk about the fastest and simplest way to improve your bottom line. And it's so fast that it's going to take effect almost immediately when you actually implement this strategy.
And who doesn't want to be more profitable?
And the kicker is, it's not about trying to generate more sales.
Which I think that's their go-to in their mind.
Yeah. So we're going to dig into this. This is the issues and the topic we talk about today, that we address today around profitability. Probably the most underestimated thing in the business that owners or the business really focuses on. They really don't pay that much attention to it like they should.
And it might not be the things you think they're going to be.
Yeah. So let's start with the math. How do you generate a profit, right? You do need sales, but from sales, you subtract expenses. You subtract paying yourself a salary.
Yes, hopefully. You do deserve a salary.
And all the expenses, all your operating expenses, once you subtract that from your revenue, then what's left over is what we call the net profit, right? Or net income, depending on how your accountant has set it up. But anyways, it's the bottom line. After everything's paid off, then the bottom line is your net profit. So simple, right? I think we all know that. And so how do you increase your profit? Well, like most, right? We just say, well, we just generate more sales, we can increase the bottom line. In theory, yes. But a lot of times in actual practicality, the opposite happens, where the top line goes up, the revenue goes up, and your profits actually go down.
And we had that with a client of ours.
When
we started working with them at the beginning.
Actually, one client several years ago, pretty good business, doing about $6 million a year in revenue. And the revenue was growing, but they were actually losing money. And there was another one not too long ago where their revenue, total revenue, increased by almost 50% from the year prior. Yet their profits, well, the dollar amount did increase, but the profit margin, the net profit margin, actually decreased. It went from 5%. The net profit was a year prior, when their sales were lower, their net profit was 5% of the total revenue. But then the year later, after they grew top line, their net profit was only 2% of net revenue. So the margins were actually getting smaller as the top line was getting bigger. So we're not getting too much into the nitty gritty of how that happened, but all I have to say is it happens, because if you're not really managing or staying on top of your costs, for example, right?
And let's face it, costs change all the time. We've been in the grocery store lately. I mean, things just seem to be going up, and it's hard to keep track of that
So
stuff.
If you're not managing your costs, staying on top of that, you get expense creep, what they call it, is that you don't, without realizing it, an extra dollar a month here and there, $10 a month, $4 a month, $100 a month, here and there, they just start adding up. In fact, right before we got on the call, I was looking at last year's and looking at, okay, how do we trim some expenses? And there's areas where it's like, okay, am I really utilizing this subscription? Am I utilizing this? Or is there an alternative that might be even better and cost less? I mean, these days, the way technology is these days, it's so fast where you might have a piece of software or an AI tool or whatever, and then a month later, there's a better, cheaper one.
Well, and people have they could have more than one subscription to the same thing and don't even know it because they don't look over their expenses.
Yeah, in fact, I was looking, can I combine? Is there a tool out there where I can combine a couple features and actually save some money? So, going through those things. So otherwise, yeah, if you're not on top of it, you get this expense creep. And then next thing you know, your margins are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So that's one way, right? Look at your expenses. The other way that's really underestimated, undervalued, and this is what we're going to really spend the episode on, is the price. Before you talk about total revenue, you got to start with how much are you going to charge for your product or service.
And you'd be surprised when we ask people how they came up with their price, some of the answers we get.
Yeah. And so there's 4 common pricing mistakes. These are the common ways people set their price. Call it cost plus. So actually, if you're you have a product, you're a retailer or whatever, you take your cost of goods and then you mark it up a certain percentage.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's cost plus. Take your cost of goods and you just mark it up a certain percentage. Then they look at the competitors, kind of competitive analysis. They look around the industry, look at the competitors, see what they're charging, kind of figure out where you fit, in the value, and then they set their price based on where they think they are compared to the competitors.
And they don't even know if the competitors are making money.
Yeah.
A profit.
And so what they do is you look at some of the features and benefits that you have, and you look at your competitors and you say, well, we may not be as good as them or we're better than them. And so you kind of try to price between a couple of competitors, or you might think, hey, I'm better than they are, but we're not going to charge as much. We're going to undercut their pricing a little bit to see if we can steal some customers, right? So that's why this competitive analysis, and you kind of benchmark your product or service based on other people, and then you set your price. And then there is the kind of penetration pricing, kind of alluded to a little bit, is, hey, either new to market or we got a new product in a new channel, and we're just going to undercut price so that we can generate as much customers as possible. And like tech industry does that a lot. They usually go with a freemium model. They launch something free and they just try to generate as much users as possible, and then they start charging, mm-hmm. right? That's very, very common.
Or it's a free trial for 30 days or something.
Yeah. So, without even just a free thumb, a lot of times they're just introducing something at a really low price. Kind of like Uber did,
used to be cheap.
It used to be cheap. Right now, I don't think it's cheaper than the cab. But anyways, they do that's penetration pricing, where they're just trying to get market share, and then they start raising the price. Problem with all 3 of those models: number one, this last one I just said, penetration pricing. Don't do that. Like, it doesn't work. Like, when you look at the tech industry, the reason why it works for them, actually percentage wise, it doesn't work on them. But the reason why they're able to even stay afloat for years is because they have investors backing them up. Right? So the average small business do not have investors, so you don't have the luxury to do penetration pricing and lose money on every sale, basically.
But that's still have money.
That's unfortunately, that's kind of the mindset or the strategy that a lot of businesses have adopted when they're starting out, thinking, oh, we'll just come in low just to get as much sales as possible, and as long as we sell enough volume, then we're going to make it up, right? And the bottom line. We'll get a good bottom line if we generate enough volume. So anyways, all to say is the problem with all 3 of those pricing strategies is it does not account for the value of the product or service. So it's all either a math equation, cost plus just a math equation, or competitive analysis. You're just making some kind of arbitrary measurement against you versus a competitor without really digging into the value. And then the last one, the penetration pricing, again, it's actually undervaluing yourself. Right? So none of those pricing strategies really account for the true value of your product and service. And so that's what we're kind of dig into a little bit. Also, what happens is it's also kind of hard because it's very subjective, and determining value of your product or service is very subjective. I mean, if you think about like a Louis Vuitton purse or a high-end restaurant versus your down the street mom and pop restaurant, Nike shoes versus Keds. I mean, you name it. When you look at all these different products and the different price points, and you're saying, hey, what really constitutes, the value? Like say a Louis Vuitton purse goes for thousands of dollars. Mm-hmm. If you look at the actual material that they do, it is made with good material, but if you break it down, the cost of that material and even the time it takes to put it together, even if it's hand done and all that, the markup is like hundreds,
a quadrillion. Yeah, exactly.
Hundreds, compared to a similar product with a similar material, handmade and all that, would be maybe half the price, right? I mean, so when you look at the total quality from an objective standpoint, as far as the material, the craftsmanship and all that, Calvin Klein versus a Louis Vuitton, big, huge difference in price point. So what accounts for the value, right? And that is a thing that, that figuring out what that value is counts for a huge differential in the profit margins, right? And so for yourself, you got to start thinking, what is the real value of my product or service? And that's going to be worth more than just simply marketing up 25, 50%. So anyways, before we get there, pricing. This is a very sensitive topic for a lot of businesses, including myself when I first started.
A lot of emotions and feelings. Yeah. I mean, we've had to handhold plenty of clients through this.
But here, if you don't address this issue, because this is, like I said in the beginning, this is the fastest and simplest way to grow your bottom line, because we're not adding costs, right? So the price increase that you put into effect all goes to the bottom line. There's no additional marketing costs. You don't have to go out and you don't have to go get more customers. It's really institute a new price, and immediately what you're going to find is an increase in the bottom line. Now,
because we're not adding to expenses at all.
Now, I know you're already thinking, like even I did when my mentor said you need to double your price, right? I'm saying I had all the reasons to tell them why I couldn't justify the price increase. There's all kinds of reasons. And it all comes down to the fear of losing customers, basically, is what it is, right? They're not going to buy. We're going to lose customers, yada, yada, yada. Now, we've heard it all. I've said it myself of our own business, and I've heard it all with all our clients. And guess what? We've always been able to successfully institute a new price for all of them. But if you don't,
and they were able to stay in business because some of them were on the verge of going under.
So if you don't address this issue, obviously it's going to continue to put stress on your bottom line. And when you don't have healthy profit margins, like you should have at least, write this down and circle it and highlight it. But your net profit margin, the target that you need to hit, is 15% of total revenue. So your net profit margin should be at least a minimum of 15% of your total revenue. So if you made if you're a solopreneur, bringing $100,000 last year, after you pay yourself and all your expenses, $15,000 should be left over as net profit. If you're $1 million business, that means $150,000 should be left over in net profit after all the bills are paid and plus your salary.
So this means you need to be keeping track with this on a regular basis, not just at the end of the year.
Yeah. And so what do you use that bottom line for is to reinvest. Mm-hmm. I mean, think every business can use something. Or
do we need another employee? Do we need a new software? Is there a new invention or strategies or ideas, something you want to create that's new?
Yeah. So when you're not operating with healthy enough margins, you're not going to be able to invest in those things, which is going to cost you more time, right? Because if you're in the mindset of let's generate more sales to improve the bottom line, then guess what? That's just more time, right? More effort. You got to put in maybe even sometimes if you're already investing in the marketing, you're going to put a little more into marketing, right? And so you got to put more money into it. Where's that going to come from? Well, the bottom line, right? And then, or if you can't afford that, then you're just going to put more time and effort into it.
And then that's going to cause a lot of strain and stress on the family.
Which is the last point, is the stress. So the cost of not addressing this issue is the inability to reinvest, which is going to cost you more time and more stress, right? And so you're probably already feeling it. So let's do this because, like I said, remind yourself. I said this is the fastest and simplest way for you to improve your bottom line. So let's address the natural fear when we bring up raising prices, right? There's a natural fear to this. Yes, there's. I had it too, right? I remember I told you my mentor early on said you got to double your price, and I gulped, And I said, well, I'm just starting. I need to get my, brand recognition, yada yada yada. I don't think they can, like the target audience that I'm going after. I don't think they can afford it. All that kind of stuff. But what I found was, and you start to dig into the psychology of price setting, that it's kind of counterintuitive because your price, psychologically speaking, to your customer or potential customer, is determining how is kind of your price is psychologically speaking is determining or speaking the value of your what you're selling.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So think about it for yourself. We're all consumers. And so if you were to hear a commercial for a luxury car, maybe a brand new luxury car, right? And there the commercial is, it's very classy looking. Maybe it's a fast engine or interior. The leather is great. And this is you can tell that they're selling or supposedly selling a luxury automobile. Yet they're said, hey, starting price at $15,000, right? You're not thinking luxury.
I know. I was thinking the same thing with the Louis
Vuitton.
Louis Vuitton thinking, honey, handbag. If you saw one selling for $100, you'd be like, I bet you that's not real. That
Yeah.
can't be
So
real.
when you're in your marketing, when you're talking about how great you are, in your product and service and the difficult problem that you're solving and all that kind of stuff, and you're saying how, basically exposing the value basically of what you're selling, and yet your price point does not match what you sell, then your audience on the other side is going to be very skeptical, right? I mean, think about it. As a consumer, we're going to be skeptical. It's too good to be true. I see. But what happens when the price starts to match a little bit what the perceived value of what you're communicating, and then what you're hoping that the consumers, what's in the consumer's head?
Oh, I think I'm going to get value then. I'm going to get something really good. You know what I mean? Because I'm paying more. So I think I'm going to get a better service and better quality.
At least if I'm in the market of that kind of product and that kind of value, high value, I'll pay more attention to what they're trying to sell, right? But if the price point is obviously, half what I would think it would go for, because, like I said, don't do competitive analysis, don't price yourself based on the competitors. But, consumers, they kind of know, especially those that either already purchased a product like yours, they already kind of know the landscape a little bit. They kind of know where the price points tend to be.
Well, and I think too, it's sad when we undercharge what we're worth. I think a lot of it can do with your own self-image, because how many times has something gone out of business and you really like that product or service and we would have been willing to pay more? I'm like, oh my gosh, I love that. It's like, I always thought it was a little, on the low end of a price, but I would have been willing to pay more just for it to stay around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like one of our favorite restaurants down the street. So think about the psychology of price setting. What is your price saying to your customer, right? And so whenever we've seen a price increase up to 15%, I don't know if we've ever seen our clients lose customers. The most common comment is, we just increased customers. We just got more customers. We got more clients. People just referred us another client. There's all kinds of stuff. There's actually, again, it's the psychology of the price. The price is, all of a sudden when the price went up, then guess what? The perceived value went up. And the trust of that perceived value went up.
Well, I remember one client, they had a really hard time with this, and it took them months to raise their price, but they really needed to. I mean, if they're going to stay in business, they needed to do that. And they got up the nerve, we held their hand, and they did it. And somebody emailed back and said, oh my gosh, we thought we were going to do this a long time ago. So they were already expecting it. Yeah. But it just, like probably a couple years ago they were. And so, and all the other people, when they said they needed to raise their price, they didn't blink an eye and they didn't say anything.
Yeah, they didn't. They were holding their breath. They sent out the letter to all their clients talking about the price increase, holding their breath, and then nobody said anything. Just the money kept coming in. Yep. And then except for that one comment, which was, I was wondering when you're going to raise your price, because they knew the value that they're getting, right?
And sometimes clients even say that to our clients. They're like, oh my gosh, you're too cheap. You need to raise your price. And they still don't raise their price.
Yeah, I just did a workshop recently here in Pasadena, and I was talking about pricing. And I asked the group, has any of your customers ever told you should raise your price, or made some kind of comment alluding to the fact that your price is too low? And probably about a third of the hands went up. And I said, so did you raise your price? No. Like, why not? Like you can't, I mean, you're afraid to raise your price, yet your customers are already telling you you're too low. And basically they're saying we'll pay more.
And we want you to be around.
Yeah. In fact, we were just at this auction for this,
Yeah.
for this painting,
Painting.
right? And I was kind of involved in some of the setup for this. But anyways, auctioneer is his first time doing it, so give him grace. This artist is internationally recognized, but she had donated this painting as a fundraiser for the organization that she donated the painting to. And so, anyway, so I knew her pieces go for tens of thousands of dollars. And there's a build up, there's a little promo video before the actual auction goes off. And so the auctioneer goes, starting the bidding at $500. And I cringed, literally cringed. Oh, this is not gonna be good. And then he only went up in increments of $100. And so I'm like, oh, this is gonna be brutal.
Painful.
This is gonna be painful. It's gonna be brutal. Because think of how long.
And the artist is sitting there in this.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, how long is it gonna take just to get to $5,000, right? $100 increments. Now, fortunately, after a while, he did start jumping by 300. But anyways, in an auction, if any of you get asked to be the auctioneer,
there's a whole science.
Think about this. Number one is you got to create energy and excitement. Now, one of the things I was going against this to begin with was because they didn't have other auction items to auction off before the big item, right? Usually, there's a lead up to the big item, so you're getting people energized, they're bidding, people are winning the bid, yada yada yada, right? There's a lot of energy before the big one, so you got people like primed. So they didn't have this luxury, so there was just this piece, right? So anyways, he started way too low. I was thinking that you got to start at least minimum 2,500. Even that might have been too low, but then go up in increments of 500, because one is how you establish that auction price, that minimum price. You're now setting the tone of the value of this piece. So the minute you go 500, it's like, oh, this is just a lithograph, right? That's the value you're putting in your head. But when you get to at least 25, if not $3,000 or $4,000, now you're thinking, okay, this is a serious piece, right? And it's setting the expectation of, hey, we're going to go up $500. So when it goes up $500, and when person outbids the other person by 500, it's like, ooh, because it's big, right? It's a big jump. It's not $100. Now, thank God he didn't do his $25 increments, but there's a big difference psychologically and emotionally on $100 increase versus a $500 increase. And so when you have a $500 increase, people are, ooh, right? And so also you'd get to 5,000 and 10,000 a lot quicker. And so anyways, all to say is it petered out. It didn't even hit 5,000, but we heard the comment.
Yeah, I talked to the gal that bought the painting, and she said, "Oh, she would have paid $14,000 for it."
Yeah, so
that's what she was willing to pay.
There you go. But of course, she's not going to outbid herself, right? But anyways, all to say is this is kind of a funny way to kind of talk about the psychology of pricing and how you anchor your price, right? So even if you're launching a new item and you will say, "Hey, this is a discounted launch price," or whatever, or buy this before it hits the market, it's a soft launch price, or whatever the case may be, it's okay to do that. I'm never saying like discount or anything like that, but you always say this is the price. It's $1,000, special launch offer at $500, right? So that way, at least you anchored the value of the piece or the product or service. And then also when you raise the price up to where it should be, there's not sticker shock, right? Because it's hard to go up, as you know, right? You have the fear of raising price to begin with. So to say this thing's worth 1,000, but I'm going to charge 500 first, and then I'll go up as I get customers, it gets really, really, really hard to do that, especially if you're going to be, have to mark it up basically 100%.
Well, too, and I think this is what you're saying, is like if you are not increasing your prices every year, it's challenging. You're gonna have a hard time keeping up with inflation and everything. And it's like some people, we haven't changed our prices in 10 years. I'm like, a lot's changed in the economy in 10 years, and everything else is going up. And I know your expenses are going up. I doubt they're going down.
Yeah, so it's very common for businesses not to raise their prices for at least 3 years. Talking about inflation just on when it's just regular is roughly about 3% a year. So if you think over 3 years, now you're like 9-10%, right? Your expenses have gone up 9-10%, but most likely it's gone up a little bit more because when they determine inflation, it doesn't count for food and energy costs, which means most likely your costs overall has gone up more than 10% over 3 years. And so if you haven't raised your prices, then guess what? That all cuts into your bottom line. So that's why you may be thinking, hey, we have our sales is just as much or more than before, yet we're actually making less money. Well, a lot of it could just be because of the fact that your costs are going up and you haven't raised your prices, right? Just that alone, just not doing anything, you're likely losing money just with that.
And depending on what your product or service is, sometimes raising it by 10% is not a huge amount, but it really helps your bottom line.
Yeah. So running out of time here, but let me talk real quickly about how to determine your price, right? So there's a lot of research and formulas and focus groups and stuff you can do, but let's keep it simple for this podcast. But if you really want to know more, there's a link in the show notes for our Profit Booster assessment. So you can take that. It only takes a few minutes and it'll help you, it'll determine where your gaps are as far as your profitability, including your price. And of course, you can always have the option to talk to us too. But if you just go, you click the link in the show notes to the Profit Booster assessment, that'll help you out. That's a free assessment. It'll help you. But as far as just to keep it simple right now, what I would do is what you can do is look at your last 12 months profit and loss statement. If your net profit margin is not at least 15% of total sales, again, make sure you subtract your salary, because a lot of businesses, what they'll do is they'll take their salary or what they pay themselves out of the net. So their net profit may look good, healthy, like 20%. But my first question is always, because sometimes they don't label in the profit and loss statement the owner's salary. So I always ask, is this before or after your owner's salary? Your salary is taken out. So a lot of times it's before. So I said, okay, once we take it, how much did you pay yourself? Once we take that out, then all of a sudden their net profit margin shrinks down below 15%. So anyways, the goal is to hit 15%. So if you haven't done that, if you haven't reached that, then I said, okay, what is the average price that I need to, what's the average price increase that I need to hit to get that 15% net? So all you do is look at the profit and loss statement. And let's just say, to keep it simple, 100,000 was your total revenue and your net profit was $5,000. So that's 5% of sales. So we need to increase that bottom line by at least 15,000, or no, I'm sorry, at least $10,000. Basically, roughly, you've got to increase your price by about 10%, right? 5 to 10%. About 10%. So that's simple math. I mean, it might not be exactly that, but anyways, roughly 10% across the board. So that's your target, your goal. That's your basic goal, is to increase our sales price by roughly about 10% on average. That doesn't mean every service or every product you rise by 10%. We're talking about an average. So you got to evaluate the different products and services and say, okay, what can I justify a 5% increase or 10% increase or a 15% increase? Because a lot of times the best seller is a lot of times the thing that you're underpriced the most.
And it's a lot of times a thing somebody doesn't think it is.
Yeah.
They think the best seller is usually something else until they start looking at their numbers.
So anyways, that's your math problem. This is your thing. This is your homework assignment. What to say. Look at your profit and loss statement and say, okay, what's the price increase I need to hit? Because first you're thinking, okay, I need to increase my sales by 15%, like volume thinking. But your expenses are going to go up as well, right? So we're just thinking, without just to make sure that increase, the top line increase, most of that increase or that additional increase goes to your bottom line. The only way you can do that is by raising your price, right? So that's why I said $100,000. You need to raise your price 10%. That'll be at now $110,000, which means your net profit will be $15,000, right? Which would be a little bit less than 15% of total revenue, but you're right about there. So anyways, that's the simplified version. That'll get you started, and you'll just have to work with your team and say, okay, how do we get there? That's the question. That's the big question. How do we get there? Or, right? You can look for areas to decrease your expenses. However you get to that 15% net, that's the key issue, is our net profit margin has to be 15%. How do we get there? We can get there solely by price, or it can be a combination of price and cutting expenses. And so that's what you need to do. So that's your assignment for this week. I didn't know I was going to have an assignment. So what do you think, honey?
I love it. Because you know what? You need to know your numbers. And you'll be like, oh my gosh, this is where I've been having challenges and I never knew it. I just thought it was more sales I needed.
Yeah. So thank you for listening. If this hit home for you, I know there's another entrepreneur who needs to hear this. So go ahead and share this episode. And yeah, if you need some additional help, please just go to the show notes, click the link for the Profit Booster assessment, and either take the results and run with it or give us a call and we'll help you out. So until next week, God bless. Thank you for listening to the Thriving in Tandem podcast. Please visit our website, marriedentrepreneur.co, for a variety of free resources to help your marriage and business succeed.
And feel free to leave us a review and share this episode with another married entrepreneur. That would mean so much to us.
See you next week.